Imagine walking through a quiet park, the crunch of leaves under your feet, when your dog stops, sniffs, and uncovers something chilling. Two small bodies, hidden for decades. Who were they, and what dark secret kept them lost for 75 years? Hey, don't forget to like. Please subscribe for more shocking crime stories and hit the bell icon. The darkest truth are yet to come. In the winter of 1947, Vancouver's Stanley Park was a place of towering cedars and whispered secrets, where the city's edges blurred into wild, untamed forest. On a foggy morning, a discovery would shake the city to its core, leaving a mystery that lingered like a shadow for 3/4 of a century. Two young brothers, their names unknown, their lives erased, were found beneath a pile of leaves, their small forms curled together as if shielding each other from the cold. For 75 years, they were Vancouver's ghosts, known only as the Lost Boys of the Woods, until science in 2022 gave them back their names: Samuel and Jacob Kessler. This is their story, a tale of loss, silence, and a truth that refused to stay buried. Vancouver in 1947 was a city caught between worlds. The war had ended, but its scars lingered. Families piecing lives back together, streets humming with post-war hope, yet shadowed by hardship. Nestled against the Pacific's gray waters and framed by the jagged peaks of British Columbia, the city felt both alive and untamed. Stanley Park, a sprawling 1,000-acre wilderness at its heart, was Vancouver's pride. Locals flocked there for picnics, lovers wandered its seawall, and children chased each other through its winding trails. But beneath its beauty lay something wilder: dense thickets and quiet clearings where secrets could hide. On the morning of January 12, 1947, a retired schoolteacher named Arthur Hensley walked his collie along a secluded trail deep in the park. The air was sharp, the ground slick with frost. His dog, Tess, tugged at her leash, nose low, then bolted toward a cluster of bushes. She pawed at a low mound, half covered in damp leaves and pine needles. Arthur called her back, but Tess wouldn't budge, her barks sharp and urgent. Annoyed, he pushed through the underbrush, expecting to find a dead animal or discarded rubbish. Instead, his heart stopped. A small, pale hand poked through the earth. Arthur's breath hitched. He dropped to his knees, brushing away leaves with trembling hands. A child's face emerged, eyes closed, lashes dusted with dirt, as if asleep. Then, beside it, another. Two boys, no older than 10, lay side by side, their arms touching, their bodies curled as if huddling for warmth. Their clothes, worn jackets, patched trousers, spoke of poverty, but their faces held a strange peace. Arthur stumbled back, his stomach churning. He ran toward the park's entrance, flagging down a cyclist to call the police. When officers arrived, they sealed off the trail. The scene was haunting. Two children, buried shallowly, their bodies shielded by leaves and time. No blood, no obvious wounds, just an eerie stillness. The boys were dressed for winter, one in a faded blue coat, the other in a knitted scarf, now frayed. A rusted tin cup and a single broken shoe lay nearby, offering no clear answers. The officers stood in silence, their faces grim. Who were these boys? Why were they here? And why had no one come looking for them? News of the discovery spread like wildfire through Vancouver's tight-knit neighborhoods. By evening, radios crackled with bulletins, and the next day's papers screamed headlines. Two boys found dead in Stanley Park. The details were sparse but chilling. The boys, estimated to be between 6 and 9 years old, had been dead for months, maybe since the previous summer. The cold had preserved them, but time had blurred their features. Their clothes were mismatched, their shoes worn thin. A small canvas bag nearby held a crust of bread and a chipped marble, relics of a life cut short. The city buzzed with questions. How could two children vanish without a trace? Why hadn't anyone reported them missing? In coffee shops and church basements, theories multiplied. Some whispered of a drifter passing through, others of a family too broken to notice their absence. The press dubbed them the Lost Boys of the Woods, a name that tugged at heartstrings, evoking fairy tales and tragedies. For the police, the case was a puzzle with no edges. No missing persons reports matched the boys' descriptions. Schools, orphanages, and churches had no records of two brothers gone astray. It was as if they'd never existed. Detectives combed the park, searching for clues. The shallow grave suggested intent. Someone had placed them there, covered them carefully, as if to hide a sin. The medical examiner found no clear cause of death, no fractures, no stab wounds, nothing to suggest violence at first glance. But the way they were buried, so deliberate, screamed of something darker. Was it an accident they'd covered up, or something more sinister? Imagine this for a moment. You're a parent in 1947 Vancouver, hearing about these boys on the radio. You hug your own kids a little tighter, wondering how no one noticed two children slipping away. I read about this case years ago in a faded library book, and it's haunted me since. Two small lives, lost to the world, with no one to claim them. The police threw everything at the case. Detectives knocked on doors, showed sketches of the boys' clothing, a blue coat, a red scarf, to anyone who'd listen. They questioned loggers, fishermen, and shopkeepers, hoping someone recognized the boys. Nothing. The canvas bag's contents were examined under microscopes, but the bread was too decayed, the marble too common. Dental records were useless without names. The 1940s lacked the tools we take for granted today. No DNA, no databases, just grit and guesswork. One theory pointed to the city's underbelly. Post-war Vancouver was a magnet for transients, families moving for work, veterans struggling to adjust. Could the boys have been the children of a drifter, left behind when their parents moved on? Another theory was uglier. A family member, unable to cope, had made a terrible choice. Some whispered of a cult or a vagrant hiding in the park's depths, but every lead fizzled. No one came forward, no tearful mother, no frantic father. The silence was deafening. By spring, the case was cooling. The city moved on, as cities do, but the boys lingered in Vancouver's collective memory. Their burial site became a quiet pilgrimage spot. Locals left flowers, though no one knew who they were mourning. The police kept the case open, but the file grew dusty. Photographs, clothing scraps, and handwritten notes, all locked away in a basement. Detectives retired, new ones took their place, but the lost boys remained nameless. Years turned to decades. The world changed. Vancouver grew, its streets filled with skyscrapers, its park now a tourist magnet. But the story of the lost boys never faded completely. Old-timers shared it over beers. True crime buffs pored over yellowed clippings. The case became a legend, a ghost story told late at night. Yet, in the Vancouver Police Department's cold case unit, the file was never closed. The boys' remains, carefully stored, waited for a day when science could speak for them. In the 1960s, a retired officer claimed he'd seen the boys before. He swore he remembered two brothers playing near the park, their clothes tattered, their faces dirty. But memory is a tricky thing, and his story led nowhere. In the 1980s, a psychic claimed the boys were victims of a transient killer, but her visions were too vague to pursue. Each decade brought new theories, new dead ends. The boys' grave in Stanley Park, unmarked but known, became a symbol of what the city couldn't solve. I think about this case sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet. What must it feel like to vanish so completely that no one even knows you're gone? It's the kind of thing that sticks with you, makes you wonder about the stories we'll never know. By the 2000s, hope was fading. The officers who'd worked the case were gone, their notes all that remained. But science was changing. DNA testing, once a dream, was now real. In 22, the cold case unit decided to try again. They sent the boys' remains to a lab, hoping for a miracle. What they found would change everything. But that's a story for another day. What do you think happened to Samuel and Jacob? Who buried them in that lonely corner of Stanley Park? And why did no one search for them? The answers are coming, but they'll break your heart. The lost boys of Stanley Park had been a whisper in Vancouver's memory for 75 years, their small bodies hidden beneath leaves, their names erased by time. In 2022, a spark of hope flickered in the Vancouver Police Department's cold case unit, driven by detectives who couldn't let the mystery rest. Who were Samuel and Jacob Kessler, and what dark truth had kept them silent for so long? The answers, when they came, would unravel a city's conscience, weaving a story of heartbreak, betrayal, and a redemption that came too late. By 2022, Vancouver had transformed into a glittering coastal hub, its skyline a far cry from the modest port city of 1947. Stanley Park remained its timeless heart, where families still picnicked and joggers traced trails that once hid a tragedy. The story of the Lost Boys had faded into legend, shared in hushed tones by old-timers or debated in true crime podcasts. But for a small team of cold case detectives, the case was a promise unkept. The boys' remains, stored in a climate-controlled vault since 1947, were their last chance to speak. I first heard about this case in a Vancouver library, flipping through a brittle true crime book from the 80s. The grainy photo of that leafy mound stuck with me. 2 kids, forgotten by the world. Have you ever stumbled across a story that just won't let you go? It's like a splinter in your mind, demanding answers. The detectives turned to modern DNA technology, a world apart from the blunt tools of the 1940s. Genetic genealogy could now trace family trees through distant relatives, even across continents. In early 2022, they sent bone fragments to a specialized lab in Seattle. Extracting viable DNA from decades-old remains was no easy task. Time had degraded the samples, and the process stretched over months. Scientists cross-referenced the DNA against global databases, chasing genetic threads through cousins thrice removed, great-aunts who never knew the boys existed. Each match narrowed the possibilities, building a fragile bridge to the past. Then, the breakthrough. The DNA confirmed the boys were brothers, their genetic profiles intertwined like the arms found curled together in the park. Their names: Samuel Kessler, 9 years old, and Jacob Kessler, 7. The moment those names hit the detectives' desks, it was like a dam breaking. After 75 years, the Lost Boys were no longer ghosts, but names were only the beginning. Who were they? Why had no one reported them missing? And who had buried them in that lonely corner of Stanley Park? With names in hand, investigators dove into Vancouver's archives, yellowed birth records, faded tenancy agreements, crumbling school logs. Samuel and Jacob Kessler lived in 1947 on the city's rough east side, a neighborhood of sagging tenements and post-war struggle. Their mother, Evelyn Kessler, was a widow, her husband lost to the war in 44. She worked as a seamstress, stitching shirts for pennies in a drafty attic room. Neighbors described her as worn thin, her eyes hollow from the weight of raising 2 boys alone. Samuel, the elder, was quiet, always watching out for Jacob, who trailed him like a shadow, his laughter bright despite their hardship. The boys were known to wander, scavenging bottles or scraps to sell for a nickel. They'd often play near Stanley Park, drawn to its wild freedom. Neighbors recalled seeing them toss stones into the water or chase squirrels through the trees, but no one remembered them disappearing. No one reported them gone. That silence was a wound in itself. How could two children vanish without a cry for help? Digging deeper, detectives uncovered a name. Leonard Marsh, a handyman who drifted in and out of Evelyn's life. Marsh was a charmer when sober, with a quick smile and a knack for fixing things. But he had a dark side. Neighbors whispered of his temper, his late-night arguments with Evelyn. He'd been seen with the boys, buying them licorice or letting them tag along to odd jobs. In 1947, when police questioned him, he claimed he hadn't seen them in months. With no evidence, the trail went cold. Now, in 2022, Marsh's name resurfaced. He died in 1987, but his surviving relatives agreed to DNA tests. The results were maddeningly inconclusive. No direct link to the boys' deaths, but enough genetic overlap to suggest he was no stranger to their world. A 1947 police report, buried in the archives, painted a darker picture. A neighbor had seen Marsh yelling at the boys near the park days before they vanished. Another claimed he'd been drinking heavily that summer, his temper flaring. Was he involved, or was he just a convenient suspect in a city desperate for answers? The cause of death remained elusive, even with modern forensics. The boys' remains were too degraded for clear answers, but experts found traces of a sedative, possibly chloral hydrate, in their bones, a drug common in the 1940s, odorless, easy to slip into a drink. No fractures, no bullet wounds, just the faint chemical echo of a quiet death. The way they were buried, carefully placed, arms touching, leaves piled gently, suggested someone who knew them, someone who cared enough to mimic a proper burial, but not enough to confess. Was it Marsh? Evelyn herself, broken by poverty? Or someone else entirely, lost to time? When the Vancouver police announced Samuel and Jacob's identities in November 2022, the city stopped in its tracks. News outlets ran the story, and social media erupted with grief and speculation. A distant cousin, now in her 80s, provided a photo from 1946. A grainy snapshot of Samuel and Jacob outside their tenement, Samuel's arm around his brother, both squinting into the sun. For the first time, Vancouver saw their faces, not as sketches or faceless victims, but as real boys who'd once laughed and dreamed. Imagine standing in Stanley Park today, right where they were found. The trees are taller now, the trails paved, but that spot feels heavy, like the earth remembers. I walked there once, years ago, before I knew the story, and felt a chill I couldn't place. Ever been somewhere that holds a secret you can't name? It's like the air itself is whispering, begging you to listen. The city's reaction was a tidal wave of emotion. Old residents shared memories. Some swore they'd seen the boys playing. Others recalled Evelyn's quiet despair. True crime forums buzzed with theories. Was Marsh a monster hiding in plain sight? Did Evelyn, overwhelmed, make a desperate choice, or was there another figure, someone the police never even questioned? The lack of answers fueled a collective ache. Vancouver had moved on, built skyscrapers, welcomed tourists, but it had failed these boys. Their invisibility in life, children of a struggling widow, unnoticed by a bustling city, mirrored their invisibility in death. The police organized a memorial, small but poignant, in a Vancouver cemetery. Samuel and Jacob were laid to rest together under a simple headstone. Samuel and Jacob Kessler, brothers forever. A handful of distant relatives attended, alongside detectives who'd worked the case. One officer, now retired, stood quietly, his voice breaking as he spoke to a reporter. We gave them their names back. That's something, but it's not enough. A light rain fell, blurring the faces of those gathered, as if the sky itself mourned. The identification of Samuel and Jacob was a triumph of science, but justice remained a ghost. Leonard Marsh, the prime suspect, was long dead, as was Evelyn Kessler, who passed in 1963. The sedative traces suggested a deliberate act, not an accident. Someone had taken their lives, perhaps in a moment of rage, desperation, or cold calculation, and hidden them in the park's shadows. The gentle burial, with arms touching and leaves carefully piled, pointed to a conflicted soul, someone torn between guilt and secrecy. But who? Detectives pored over Evelyn's life for clues. She'd been a private woman, rarely speaking of her struggles. A 1947 neighbor's statement resurfaced, claiming Evelyn had been ill that summer, hospitalized for weeks. During that time, Marsh had cared for the boys, or so he said. Another witness, a shopkeeper, recalled Marsh buying a bottle of chloral hydrate from a pharmacy, claiming it was for sleepless nights. But the evidence was circumstantial, a puzzle with missing pieces. Evelyn's hospital records showed she'd been treated for exhaustion, but no one had checked on the boys. They'd slipped through the cracks of a society stretched thin by post-war recovery. Theories swirled. Had Marsh, volatile and burdened, lashed out? Had Evelyn, in a haze of despair, made an unthinkable choice before her hospitalization? Or was there a third party, a neighbor, a relative, a stranger, who'd vanished into the fog of history? The police chased every lead, but time had eroded too much. The truth was a shadow, just out of reach, taunting a city that wanted closure. This case keeps me up some nights, thinking about those boys playing in the park, unaware of what was coming. Imagine if you'd walked past them that summer, heard Jacob's laugh or seen Samuel's serious eyes. Would you have noticed they were fading away? It's the kind of question that makes you wonder about the people we pass every day, the ones we don't see. The Kessler brothers' story became more than a mystery. It became a mirror. Vancouver saw itself in their tragedy, a city that had grown prosperous but once overlooked its most vulnerable. In 1907, poverty was a quiet epidemic, and children like Samuel and Jacob were often left to wander. The war had left families fractured, systems strained, and two small boys had paid the price. Their deaths, likely by sedative, were a silent crime, hidden not just by leaves, but by a society too busy to notice. The 2022 revelation stirred a reckoning. Community groups launched initiatives for at-risk children, citing the Kesslers as a call to action. Schools held vigils, and local artists painted murals of two boys under a tree, their faces drawn from that 1946 photo. The memorials weren't just for grief, they were a promise to do better. But for the detectives, the case was a bittersweet victory. They'd restored the boys' names, but the killer, Marsh, Evelyn, or someone else, was beyond reach. Justice, in the legal sense, would never come. The burial site in Stanley Park became a quiet pilgrimage spot. Locals left flowers, marbles, and handwritten notes. "We remember you." The park's towering cedars stood watch, their branches whispering in the wind. For many, the spot was sacred, a reminder of what was lost and what was owed. The boy's headstone in the cemetery, etched with "Brothers Forever," drew strangers who felt a kinship with their story. One note, left by an anonymous visitor, read, "You deserved better. We're sorry." Samuel and Jacob Kessler were no longer the lost boys. They were real, two brothers who'd played, fought, and clung to each other in a world that failed them. Their story, solved by DNA after 75 years, was a testament to persistence, to the refusal to let the past stay silent. But it was also a scar, a reminder that some truths come too late. The sedative, the careful burial, the absence of a missing persons report all pointed to a betrayal close to home. Yet the final piece of the puzzle was gone, buried with the suspect in a grave as unmarked as the boy's once was. This case lingers because it's more than a crime. It's a question: how do we let the vulnerable slip away? I think about Samuel and Jacob sometimes, imagining them running through the park, free for a moment. Their laughter haunts me. And I wonder, what if someone had noticed? What if someone had cared? Their names are back, but their story asks us to look harder, to see the unseen, to never let another child vanish into the shadows. Well, have you ever heard of a case like this? Comment your thoughts. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and catch you in the next one.